Okay, so I just came back from the local VW Porch store and I picked myself a new points and condenser. They only had Bosch, but I'm hearing that these are the best ones to use for the engine, so let's see how that goes. Now, in order for me to replace the electronic ignition inside the distributor, I'm actually going to pull the entire unit out of the block. That way it's a lot easier for me to put these inside the distributor. And it's actually really easy. There's a 13mm nut holding the distributor bracket in place. Once that's removed, it should just come right out. You don't want to loosen the distributor clamp there because that is where your timing is set. So I'm going to remove this and we will get started on putting these in. And here we have the distributor. I have here the 009 distributor. Now when you open this, that's my electronic ignition in there, which is what I think I fried. So I'm gonna be removing this and putting the new points in there with a condenser on the side. The condenser will only have one cable coming out, and I think that goes to the negative side of the coil. I'll have to double check, but I'm gonna go ahead and set this up right now. So I have here the distributor ready to have the ignition replaced. So first thing, I'm gonna take off these clamps. I'm gonna take off this rotor and this magnetic ring here. Now with this removed, I can just get the cables out. There goes the electronic ignition. Now to put all this new stuff in here. Actually, I think I'm supposed to take this off as well. Yeah, definitely I was supposed to take this off and put this screw back in there. I won't be able to set this until it's actually placed back on the motor, so that's just temporary for now. Now to put the condenser on, and then we should be ready to put the distributor back onto the engine. I got the condenser in. I was a little confused at first as to how to actually mount this onto the distributor, but I found the original condenser that came off of this car, and you can see that the green wire goes up this bracket, mounts onto here, and then only this part goes into the distributor, and this one will stay out. So when I found that out, I realized I was missing this screw, so I pulled a spare distributor that I had laying around and I pulled one of the screws there. So now I have the condenser mounted, the connector goes in there, the cable on the points connects to here to the condenser, and then I'm ready to measure the gap on the points, and it should be at about 16 thousandths of an inch. So before I reinstall this distributor, I'm gonna see if I can set the gap here as close as possible. That way I don't have to set as much when it's in the engine. And the way to do that, you just turn this bottom part here, or the shaft, in a way so that the lobe on the shaft will push the point here, as far as possible, and then you should see that space right there, and that's what I want to measure. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and then we'll throw this onto the engine. Once I have the distributor in place, I went ahead and placed this on top dead center. Just follow the notch that's on top of the pulley and line it up with this here. You can see that right through this hole. Also, if you look at your distributor, with the rotor installed, that should be pointing directly over to this notch here, indicating it's top dead center on cylinder 1. So now that it's on top dead center, I'm gonna go ahead and measure this again. And it's pretty snug, which is why I wanted to set this before I install this on the block, so it's just a whole lot easier. Now, with that gap set, I just need to connect the cable from the point over to the terminal for the condenser, and then that condenser will connect to the negative terminal on your coil pack. Then from there, I'm gonna check to see if it's gonna throw off some spark on the spark plugs. If it does, then I'm gonna try and see if I can start it up. Alright, I have everything hooked up again to the battery of my truck. Now I'm gonna try to crank this, and we're gonna pay real close attention to the spark plug. You should see a little spark right there at the tip as I try to crank it up. You see that little spark? That's exactly what we're looking for. So we know that that is running. Now I'm just gonna double check all 4 spark plugs to make sure they're all firing. Then if it's all good, then I'm gonna throw them back in and see if I can get it to start up. For some reason, it still just does not want to turn over once I put the spark plugs in. Obviously you saw that it turns over freely without the spark plugs in there, but when I put it in there, I feel like it's just too much pressure and it just doesn't want to compress the pistons. I even wanted to run a compression test on all 4 cylinders, so I removed all spark plugs, and I try to crank it with just this one in cylinder 2, and it doesn't even want to go past 25 psi. I'm really tempted to just throwing this back into the Squareback and push starting it and seeing if it works that way, because for some reason it's just not giving enough juice for it to actually push the starter past the compression. We know we have fuel for sure. You saw the lines filling up with fuel there. We know we have spark, and I don't know what else it could be. So maybe tomorrow morning I'm just gonna throw this back in there and seeing what we can do from there.
The next morning.
And we got it running! £40 of oil pressure. Idles real smooth. Okay, so I finally got it started, and the problem was the bushing holding the starter motor onto the transmission here. It was way too small. This is the same size on the transmission in the Squareback there, but for this spare transmission I had to go get a bushing adapter because the outside diameter was too big here, so the starter was too wobbly and it wasn't turning it over. But now I got that, and I will show you getting it started now. There we go. A huge shout out to Preston Greenwood. I'll link his video in the description below. But his video really helped me try to determine that the issue I was having was on the starter bushing more specifically, and not because of the compression being too high. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This bushing here is what holds the tip of the starter motor. The new one that I got came with this one. This transmission here, basically the hole where this bushing goes into, the outside diameter is way too big for this to go into. So even when I put this bushing in there, it's still wobbling. So I think that was preventing this from being perfectly centered, holding onto the flywheel, which is why it just wasn't turning over. It only cost about $5 from the local VW shop, but as soon as I threw that in and I cranked it up, it just started up right away. So I'm really excited about this. I'm just gonna finish up a little bit more fine tuning on the engine, and when I'm ready, I'll go ahead and reinstall it into the Squareback and I should be good to go.